Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and we have quite a busy show for you here today. Obviously, on Thursdays, it always means Terrence Edwards, the great former Georgia wide receiver. We'll look forward to welcoming him into the program here today. Also, it's the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm making a Thursday appearance here, too. Jake had been joining us on Tuesdays. Jake's football schedule makes that a little bit difficult to do right now, so we had him on Friday last week. We had him on Thursday this week. If we can, I'd almost like to keep this as kind of a Thursday thing. Maybe we'll see if that works out that way. But looking forward to having Jake on the program today. I will tell you that we did pre-record that yesterday. Everything else is live today, but the Jake Fromm interview we pre-recorded yesterday, so I'll be wearing a different shirt for that than I am right now. But a really fun conversation. And some of the stuff we'd planned on getting into, some of the stuff I talked to Jake about, we're actually going to have to save until tomorrow because we've had, a couple of big things kind of pop up here the last 24 hours or so, maybe primarily the future of Georgia, Florida, and Jacksonville. And what looked like it might be heading one way, maybe there's some reason to believe that there's some new and different stuff going on. This is a little bit complicated to sift through, but it's all very, very interesting. So what do you say we get ready to talk about that off the top of the program? A lot of details out there about how things could be different for the cocktail party moving forward, but also in some respects, maybe not quite as different as some of us thought. Let's see if we can explain it, and we'll tell you what it's all about. Coming up next, it is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Two great guests on today's show. It's Jake Fromm before we're done. Always happy to have the former Georgia quarterback a part of our show. And every Thursday, one of my favorite conversations we have throughout the week is the chance to talk to the great former Georgia wide receiver, Terrence Edwards. We'll do that in just a few minutes' time. So Terrence Edwards and Jake Fromm, two great guests on today's show. We will get to that here coming up. Prior to that, this, I think, is kind of interesting. There's an assumption that I've been making for a while, and sure enough, you can understand the old cliche about assumptions, why oftentimes it's not great to make them, and maybe this is an example of that being true once again. The assumption I've been operating on for a while now, as someone who loves Georgia tradition in general, but the specific tradition of the game we kind of think of as the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, I have been trying to kind of come to peace with the idea the cocktail party just might get canceled. And some of this is because Kirby Smart wants that to happen. Some of this is because the SEC is about to undergo a lot of change. We're welcoming in 2 new members to our league next year. That's going to necessitate some sort of schedule change. So you're either going to have an 8-game conference slate where you play other teams more frequently, or you move to a 9-game conference slate where you'll have still room for 3 permanent opponents, but also kind of rotating around and playing a lot more of the league with regularity. And with all of that change, it just sort of seemed likely that a change that might be kind of in the works anyway would almost certainly kind of fall into place, and that it might just become one of those deals where Georgia and Florida had to leave Jacksonville, not play there each and every year, and start playing the game on kind of a home-and-home basis. Now, this is one of those things where I think reasonable people can disagree. I'm a big fan of the cocktail party. I've enjoyed going my entire life. Many of you kind of feel the same way. However, there is a large contingent of Georgia fans who feel the opposite, and I respect the feelings of those Georgia fans there on that. I would say within the last 5 or 10 years, the number of Georgia fans who would like to see Georgia-Florida become a home-and-home game, I think that number's probably grown. I remember I had a chance to talk to now former Georgia Athletic Director Greg McGarity about this a few years ago, and I kind of asked him, what do you think the split among the fan base is? And he kind of guessed it was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 50-50. I don't know that there's better information out there than that. I'd be curious to hear what Josh Brooks, the Georgia Athletic Director, might say if asked the same question. But whatever the percentage is, there's a large number of Georgia fans that would love to have a better home game in Athens every other year. And there's a large percentage of Georgia fans who love the idea of the cocktail party, like that game down there in Jacksonville. And a lot of this, as you know, kind of stems on where you live. If you live up here in the north part of the state, well, obviously a game in Athens is a little bit more convenient for you. If you live down there in the south part of the state, there's a huge contingent of Georgia fans who don't just live down in kind of southeast Georgia, but kind of across that Florida border even. Jacksonville Bulldog Club, one of the biggest, most vibrant Bulldog clubs there is. All kinds of UGA fans kind of live there around what we kind of think of as that First Coast area of Florida. So Big divide among Georgia fans about this issue. Where you live kind of goes a long way oftentimes towards determining how you feel about this. But while we may all get our vote, the person who oftentimes speaks the loudest about stuff like this, the person who carries the most weight when he chooses to use his words, is Georgia coach Kirby Smart. And at different times, Smart has made his opinions on this pretty well known. Now, Smart also sometimes kind of pivots to a little bit more of a political answer of, hey, I'm fine with the game wherever it is and, blah, blah, blah. But other times, Smart kind of is a little bit more aggressive about making sure folks are aware of exactly what his opinion is. I'll give you an example of this. SEC Network last year, SEC Media Days, when that event in the summertime was in Atlanta. So Smart's on the TV set there with the SEC Network, and he's kind of going back and forth with Tim Tebow. Now, some of this is just kind of for fun. Kirby's just playing along with the TV script here a little bit. But nonetheless, Smart and kind of going back and forth with the former Florida quarterback kind of makes his case for this game not remaining in Jacksonville, this game kind of becoming a home and home. For context here on where we're about to go, let me let you hear a little bit of Kirby with Tebow last year, SEC Media Days. Kirby making the defense to cancel the cocktail party. Here is Kirby from last summer.
How come you want to switch it up?
Why is it one of the best environments?
I think
how many times did you play in Athens now?
None.
How many times did we get to play in Gainesville?
None.
I think that's special.
It is.
I think that's special.
But you get a lot of home and road games, but you only get one where it's split 50-50
no, you
in
don't.
the middle.
We're going to play Oregon this year in Mercedes.
I know, and there'll be pockets full of it, but this one's literally split right down the middle. Orange and blue, red and black.
It absolutely is. I tell you what, y'all tell Florida you call the AD and you ask him to come to Atlanta and come play us. We'll play in Atlanta anytime they want to play.
I feel like it's more of an advantage for Florida than?
It's not an advantage for anybody. You look at the history of it. The team with the better players and the better team usually wins that game, and it affects the outcome of the SEC East. It's more about, for me, I'm competing against guys all across the SEC who host kids at their biggest game.
So that's Kirby Smart making it pretty clear that if he had his way, Georgia-Florida would be played in Athens every other year, and he'd tolerate the road game in Gainesville to get the home game that he wants. And I think there have been other statements like that throughout the years where Smart sort of made his opinion known, but I don't believe he's ever been quite as forceful as he was in the SEC Network about that last summer. And so because of that, and because of another thing that happened prior to last year's game, do you remember when, I don't mean to get like procedural into the weeds and stuff like this, but do you remember like when Georgia and Florida issued a joint statement together prior to last year's game where they were talking about leaving all options open for the future of that game? That was a little bit of a different type of twist in all of this because, previously it sort of seemed like whatever Georgia wanted to do, the head coach obviously speaking one way, the Florida contingent was pretty well adamant about, we want to keep this game in Jacksonville, But when Georgia and Florida came together for a joint statement, that was a little bit of a signal to the folks in Jacksonville, I believe, that if you want to keep this game here in the future going forward, you better be ready to pony up big bucks on all of this. Otherwise, we're open to every single option if we're not getting quite as much money from you as we feel like this game is worth. And so you add that to what Kirby has said, the winds of change blowing in the SEC in general. And once again, to go back to the idea of an assumption, my assumption has been, well, I guess we better enjoy this year's cocktail party because there's a very good chance it comes to an end after this. After all, the kind of official term of the contract does end after this year's game with option years in place for the next two seasons after that, 2024 and 2025. And so I thought, well, maybe they don't even take the option years. Maybe they just cut it clean here right now and get ready to start playing this thing home and home with the introduction of two new teams to the SEC, an entirely different SEC scheduling model. Maybe that just means this is the last year for Georgia, Florida, and Jacksonville. But things apparently are a lot more complicated than that little summation I just gave you right there. First of all, we've got the Jacksonville mayor, Lenny Curry, who is about to have his term ended. There's a new election coming up. There'll be a new mayor in Jacksonville, I believe, after that. But Curry went on a good sports radio station, 1010XL, down in Jacksonville yesterday, and Curry talked about the fact that the stadium, kind of formerly known as the Gator Bowl, now it's what? TIAAF or something like that. It's not 1,000 different names. But that stadium is apparently due for some renovations, which will cause, at least for a couple of years, the cocktail party not to be played in Jacksonville, no matter what the long-term future of the game is. Now, this is interesting. So let me let you hear Lenny Curry, Jacksonville radio yesterday. This is the Jacks mayor on at least a brief interruption coming up for the Georgia-Florida game in Jacksonville because the stadium's going to be renovated. Take a listen to Curry from 1010XL.
Also take into consideration Florida-Georgia, Georgia-Florida game, depending on which year it is. And my chief administrative officer right now is in regular communications and talks with both schools. So we're still working the deal. Ideally, maybe it's we're in 2023. So maybe it's a 25-26 renovation. That'd be a good goal. And then both schools would, in those 2 years, get their home game. And then the goal is to have already negotiated a deal that they're back in Jacks under the new stadium in 27 and beyond.
So that's Lenny Curry saying, hey, the stadium's got to be renovated. It's going to take 2 years. And for that 2-year period of time, Georgia and Florida are going to have to go play this game in a home-and-home situation, much the same way many of you were old enough and alive to remember when they did this in 1994 and 1995, back when Florida was good, Georgia wasn't. There was a home-and-home back then while the stadium was renovated back at that particular time. Now, what's interesting here, and this is just kind of a little bit of a footnote, is that Curry says, hey, you do the renovations in 2025 and 2026, you're back here playing in 2027. However, there is some reporting out there that says the actual dates in which this might take place are probably more along the lines of renovations taking place in 2026 and 2027. So, in other words, maybe they would keep the situation in place for the 2 option years, the 2024 year, the 2025 year, and then actually do the renovations in 2026 and 2027. I know that's kind of complicated, but that's, maybe what's going on there. A little bit of dispute about what 2 years the renovations might occur on. But the point of all of this is that once again, to go back to the notion of an assumption, if you've been operating on the assumption, well, Georgia, Florida is not long for Jacksonville anyway, this stadium renovation coming at this particular time just makes it that much easier to say, okay, well, I guess it's just over. Stadium's not, appropriate for the game right now. You're going home, for 2 years, home and home for 2 years. And once that 2 years is done, maybe just keep right on doing that, which is what some people kind of thought they were going to do anyway. However, this is where a little bit of a plot twist occurs, because apparently, I'm going to show you this on Twitter from Andy Staples. Andy's closely connected to the Florida program, but also writes and covers college football for The Athletic. He has a very interesting story out right now where he talks about the 2 years of renovations that are going to be occurring in Jacksonville, that it's not perhaps quite as simple to say, well, Georgia and Florida will just go home and home for both those years. Let me show you this on the screen here from Andy Staples, who writes on Twitter as a tease to his story. The Bulldogs and Gators may have to relocate their annual cocktail party game for 2 years. So one in Athens and one in Gainesville, right? He asks. Maybe, but Andy Staples says there's a lot of money in keeping the game neutral. So in this particular story from Andy Staples at The Athletic, and you can read it, it's a subscription website, but if you've got a subscription to The Athletic, you can read the story. Staples talks about the fact that it's not quite a done deal, or maybe not quite as simple as you might assume, that when this game goes home and home, or when a game has to leave Jacksonville for 2 years, in either 2024, 25, or 26 and 27, whichever 2-year period of time this is, it's not as simple to assume that the game will just be played in Athens and Gainesville for those 2 years. Staples says that the game in Jacksonville has now become so lucrative that it's essentially, in the eyes of the schools involved, Georgia and Florida, a little bit of a financial loser to have the game home and home, because they make so much money from Jacksonville. It actually cost them that much money to play the game home and home. These 2 schools, Georgia and Florida, might actually be content to shop it around for those 2 years. And so while the game historically has been a neutral site game in Jacksonville for as long as any of us can remember, for the 2 years the Jacksonville Stadium is being renovated, they may not do what they did in the 90s, which is just take it home and home for a couple of years. Staples reports they may shop it to Atlanta. They may shop it to Orlando. They may shop it to Tampa, and they may shop it to Miami, which means that when the 2-year period of time is up for the Jacksonville Stadium renovations, now, according to Staples of The Athletic, now Jacksonville is having to negotiate and kind of bidding war against one of these other cities to keep the long-term future of the game. So it may be way too soon to say this is definitely going to become a home-and-home type situation for Georgia and Florida. Now, that's a lot of the facts related to this. Let me give you my simple opinion. I am not in favor of this game being played in a neutral site anywhere other than Jacksonville. To me, my first choice for this game would be Georgia, Florida, and Jacksonville. My second choice for this game, if you can't play in Jacksonville each and every year, would be able to play it, in Athens and in Gainesville. Those are the only 2 options I'm willing to consider. Even a game that's closer to home here in Atlanta. Georgia already plays in Atlanta like 4 times a year, it seems like, in most years. I don't know that Georgia needs one more game in Atlanta. If it makes the program money, I guess good for them. They're not sharing that money with me anyway, so I don't care about that. I don't think Georgia needs another game in Atlanta. And you can't have the cocktail party in Orlando. Listen, I love taking my kids to Disney, but they're not going to tolerate our nonsense down there for the cocktail party. You can't have the cocktail party in the middle of the Magic Kingdom. You just can't do that. That's not a good fit. And listen, we were in Miami a couple of years ago for the Orange Bowl. Those people don't care about college football down there. They don't care about Georgia, Florida. They barely even care about the Orange Bowl. And don't even get me started on Tampa. So it is interesting reporting from Andy Staples. And I guess the key takeaway you ought to get here is that the demise of the cocktail party to this point in time may have been greatly exaggerated. The fact is, the two schools, Georgia and Florida, they like the money they get from this neutral site game. And while eventually this may become a home-and-home situation, it's not so safe to assume that's definitely going to happen. Even, by the way, in the 2 years coming up in which the Jacksonville Stadium is going to be renovated, that Georgia and Florida may be content to shop this around and see if another city is willing to give them the big bucks for a game like this. When that happens, when that's all said and done, maybe back in Jacksonville again, this story may not be nearly quite as settled as I at one point in time thought it was probably going to be. So we'll follow that. We'll see where it goes from here. It is Brandon Adams' DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. And happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. On the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com, Apple, Spotify, everything else. A lot of ways to catch our program. We're just glad you picked one of them and you use that. And we're fairly platform agnostic. Whichever one works for you, we're just glad it does. And we just thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of what we do all day, every day. Summertime, fall time, wintertime, springtime, whatever. We're just here for you on DawgNation Daily. Glad you're here there as well. And so thankful to our friends at Merriweather and Tharp who make it all possible for you there too. Your source for Georgia divorce. And I do realize that kind of stops everybody in their tracks. We're talking Georgia football. We're talking the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. And Bob Tharp, one of the partners over there at Merriweather and Tharp, you better believe he loves those conversations. That's why he likes being a part of DawgNation Daily. He likes all that fun, and he likes all the good stuff that kind of comes from a college football conversation like this. And divorce is like the exact opposite of that, right? The fun of college football, the fun of sort of figuring out where Georgia's going to be playing some of its big games and what we get to do as a part of all that. We love that. But for some people, life sometimes is about confronting something that you don't love. In some cases, it's about confronting something that you hate. And no doubt the divorce process, if you find yourself going through it, I'm guessing that generates a lot of negative emotions and energy for you. And I do understand that. And I do get that. And I wish I could wave a magic wand and just take it all from you. If I really could, obviously I would. But since I can't, let me do the next best thing for you. That if you find yourself having to confront this particular version of reality, the best way to do it is to have a strong advocate on your side. It is. Because that strong advocate can help explain the law to you, can help talk to you about how you can navigate certain aspects of the law to your benefit. There are a lot of kind of issues downstream from divorce, stuff with your finances, stuff with your children, stuff with all of that. Hey, putting yourself up in a position to be the best setup you can be for a successful next season of your life, that's what's important here right now. My friends at Merriweather and Tharp want to help you do that. So please have that free initial consultation with one of their attorneys. Then make the decision to hire Merriweather and Tharp to walk with you through this divorce process. I truly believe that you'll be glad that you did. You may not have chosen divorce. Divorce may have been handed to you here, or you may have tried to avoid it and now kind of realize that it's unavoidable. That just may be the reality. But if that is your situation, my friends at Merriweather and Tharp can help you. So find them online, theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. Merriweather and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. All right. A couple of really fun things coming up. As I told you before, it's Jake Fromm later. It's Terrence Edwards in a few minutes. All of that's really good. We'll give you another name in our Kroger Perfect Moms giveaway. Excited about being able to do that on the program today there as well. So all of that's coming up. Let me do two quick things before we get there. One of these is fun. One of these is kind of serious. So if you go to DawgNation.com, our friends at the AJC also, I'm sure have plenty of coverage about this there as well. There are new details in the Devin Willock situation at Georgia. Willock's father has filed a lawsuit, substantial sum of money that they are seeking on that. Georgia has had a response to that. Y'all kind of know the deal here on this. We've kind of gotten into sort of the legal part of all of this. We sort of knew it was probably heading that way. I don't have much to say about that. I really don't. We told you a couple of months ago that, once this kind of got past the initial stage, that it just wasn't a topic for us to address on a daily basis. We're just not. That's just not what we do. So you want to know more of the details about that, you can go read that, DawgNation.com. And, if something pops up that's relevant to our audience, obviously we'll figure out a way to talk about it here on the show. But for now, I want you to know that's out there. You're probably already aware of that. You can follow that and sort of figure out where that goes. This is obviously just, an expected next step in all of this. And then, the rest of these steps will kind of play out. But we are not court TV, so we are not going to follow every twist and turn of the legal beat on this process. But nonetheless, there are plenty of people who do. And I'm sure you'll seek it out if you want it. Now, on a much more fun note, let's go around the doghouse here just for a moment. And so, I'll tell you a quick story. This is kind of what my life is like this time of year. So I wear multiple hats in my life. And one of the hats that I wear, the hat you probably know me as wearing, is the host of DawgNation Daily. Greatest job in the world. I love doing it. So I show up in the morning. We kind of do the Georgia football show, and that's kind of my life. But as you sort of transition to the afternoon into the evening, I put on a different hat, completely different hat. I become my son's baseball coach. And, this time of year, we're very busy during baseball. We're doing that several nights a week, which I love. It's just a completely different version of me. Love doing that. But that kind of occupies a lot of time during the evening. So here's what almost always happens. When the baseball game is done, you come home. I'm like anybody else. I'm getting back on the phone. I'm looking to see what have I missed while I've been unplugged. Because when you're kind of in the baseball thing, you're very involved in all that. And so, you kind of miss a lot, especially when it comes to college football, and it seems like there's always something crazy going on around the SEC or something like that. And so I'm always kind of curious, what have I missed while I've been doing this baseball thing? So I started scrolling through there and saying that. A lot of the Georgia-Florida stuff was popping up last night. I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. But there was also this thing that I got shared multiple times. I mean, it's amazing to me within like the Georgia internet, like, UGA Twitter, if you will. It's amazing to me how quickly something can go viral. I mean, it's just amazing. We kind of go from 0 to 100 just like that. And this is an example of that. So Zack Smith, you may remember as former Ohio State assistant coach years ago, kind of involved in some I don't know. You can Google if you want to know. He's been involved in all kinds of stuff. Part of the Urban Meyer staff there. For the most part, Smith's kind of outside the coaching ranks because of some of his own choices right now. But now he's just doing a show because literally everyone has to have a show now. And so Zack Smith has a show too. And so Smith had a clip that he shared of, I guess what you'll just kind of describe as sort of trolling Georgia a little bit. Now, I had this explained to me that maybe this is not supposed to be taken at face value. This is actually supposed to be kind of a joke. In other words, they're intentionally trying to fire up Georgia because they want Georgia to exceed the 11.5 season win total. If I'm understanding all this correctly, that may be kind of what all this is. But Georgia fans jumped all over this yesterday because they have a very short fuse, and this is what we love about DawgNation. But nonetheless, that's the case. So just for fun here is the former Ohio State assistant coach. He was wide receivers coach, right? The former Ohio State assistant coach on a part of a show that he's on now, kind of trolling Georgia and its fans. It's got a big reaction from UGA fans last night. Take a listen to this.
The reality is this. Georgia won back-to-back national championships on the back of a ridiculous defense that is gone. That defense is gone. Kirby's little pet project is gone. The run is over. It was a cute 2 years. Back to the abysmal depths of being 8-4. Enjoy, Bulldog fans.
So I don't think this is meant to be taken seriously. Now, I'm never quite so sure anymore. As I told some of y'all on Twitter last night, in this day and age, I can't tell what's real and not anymore. It just sort of feels like everything is kind of make-believe from time to time and sort of put on from time to time. Clearly Zack Smith's cutting sort of a wrestling-style promo here on this. In fact, it kind of makes me think, maybe I should start yelling and doing stuff like that a little bit more. Maybe that's the key here. Maybe I don't spend enough time yelling on this show because it feels like he's certainly yelling right there. But I don't think this is meant to be taken seriously. And from that standpoint, maybe I will get kind of worked up here for a moment. I'm actually kind of offended by this because what Smith is sort of doing there is making a mockery out of something that we believe is very real. And, when you hear stuff like that, I think people want to kind of put this in the box of, oh, yeah, ha, 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 ha. All of those doubters for Georgia, they were all fake. Well, this dude may be fake. He's cutting sort of a wrestling-style promo. I don't think he's meant to be taken seriously. I don't even think he's trying to be taken seriously. But when Reese Davis, on the clip we played for yesterday, when he picks Michigan to be number one, he does want to be taken seriously. And I think if you're a Georgia fan, that ought to be offensive to you. And when Urban Meyer says he thinks the Texas pound for pound is the most talented roster in college football, I think that ought to be kind of offensive to you. I mean, if you're a Georgia fan, as I said yesterday, I love college football conversations. If you want to talk about Texas, I'm here for it. Could Texas beat Alabama week 2? I think they could. Is Quinn Ewers one of the really interesting quarterbacks in the sport right now? I think that's true. I love talking Texas football with you. I'd be happy to do it. But acknowledge Georgia first and then move on to Texas. I know that Georgia's the best team on paper. I know Georgia's the favorite here. But I tell you, Texas may be kind of interesting. Texas could be a dark horse playoff contender. I'm fine with that conversation. If you start with Georgia, then work your way to Texas. But don't give me Texas off the top as the most talented team in college football. That's laughable on its face. Same thing. I'm a college football fan. You want to have a conversation about the chance that Michigan could win and beat Alabama for could beat Ohio State for a third straight year, could win the Big Ten again, that Jim Harbaugh, after kind of at one point in time being a little bit of a cartoon character, has actually turned out to be a pretty good coach, despite the fact that he keeps flirting with the NFL, staying in college. He's kind of proven himself to be a winner. I think that's kind of an interesting conversation. As a college football fan, I'm happy to have that conversation with you. But start with Georgia. Say something to the effect of, clearly you can't rank Michigan ahead of Georgia, but you know what? They could be back in the playoff again here this year. That's not what Reese Davis did, and that's not what Urban Meyer did. And that's real. That's meant to be taken seriously. We're also kind of entering into kind of a media days season, talking season type stuff where everybody's going to be workshopping their takes. Everybody's going to be shopping around to say something interesting about somebody other than Georgia because Georgia runs the risk of making the sport kind of boring. So the stuff like the Zach Smith thing here, cutting a promo against Georgia, I actually don't even think that's all that helpful because I think it allows people to kind of assume that all of the kind of negative, doubt or stuff that exists about Georgia, that it's all as fake and make-believe as the stuff with Zach Smith supposed to be right there. But some of y'all know that's not the case. Some of y'all know this was very real. Preseason a year ago, when everyone was sort of touting Ohio State and Alabama at the expense of Georgia, prior to the Tennessee game, prior to the South Carolina game, prior to the Kentucky game, all kinds of games a year ago, when somebody other than Georgia was kind of the pick, that was all real. And this Georgia team in 2022 played with an edge because of it. Well, guess what? I think they may have a chance to have an edge about themselves here in 2023 there as well. The Zach Smith thing may be fake, but everything else, or at least a lot of other things, are plenty real enough, and you better believe that every Georgia fan, including right here on the show, we are saving receipts on all of it. And that is Run the Dawghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Now, but before we get ready to bring on Terrence Edwards, have a fun conversation with him, let me also shout out our latest winner of our Kroger Perfect Mom giveaway. Now, why do we call them perfect moms? Because so many of the moms in our audience are perfect, right there for what we need when we need them, and we're thankful for that, including my own mom and the mom of my children, my wife, who just serves them so well. But so many of you have your own story to tell on that. Plus, Georgia's also celebrating a go for 2 in 22, perfect season there too. So it kind of ties in together perfectly, if you will. And our winner today is Linda Kelman from Grayson, Georgia. Congratulations, Linda, for being our perfect mom today. Nominated by her son, John, who says she always puts family first, married 50 years and still going. How about that? What a great thing. Best mom I could ever ask for. Well, John, we appreciate your nomination. Congratulations to Linda there in Grayson for being our big winner. Great collection of gift cards coming your way, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. And folks, don't forget, get ready for Mother's Day. Our friends at Kroger get you covered on all of that. In fact, we'll even tell you more about that before our show is done when we welcome on Jake Fromm here coming up in a couple of minutes. But for now, though, on a Thursday, as you've come to expect, always so many great things to be said and asked for and talked about when it comes to the great former Georgia Bulldog, Terrence Edwards. Let's get ready to do that right now. We'll kind of get into some of the stuff about, is it fair to say that there are doubters out there for the Georgia program after 2 straight national championships? Could that still be true? And what should the future of Georgia-Florida be in Jacksonville? We'll kind of cover a lot of that ground with Terrence Edwards and so much more on the way. Glad to have him and all of you with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So a lot I want to talk to Terrence Edwards about, but Terrence, I got to ask you about this off the top. Saw this on Twitter the other day. You're obviously a part of that great Milton staff there, one of the great programs in that North Fulton area. Do y'all have one of Michael Vick's relatives on your team? I saw you interacting with Vick a little bit on Twitter the other day. Do you have a Vick relative there as a part of that Milton program right now?
Yes, we do. We have this Shamar Vick is his little cousin.
That's really cool. I mean, first of all, that in the Atlanta area to have that last name on the back of your jersey, that's a pretty big deal, right? I mean, I'm obviously, I'm sure he wants to make his own name and, doesn't want the extra attention maybe, but that's a pretty prominent name to have on the back of your jersey here in the Atlanta area, is it not?
Yes, it is, and he definitely has the Vick genes as well. So I'm excited to see this young man play for the Milton Eagles this year. And he's a great young man on and off the field, and I told him, I played with your cousin in Atlanta, so he thought that was pretty cool. So hopefully we could get Mike down to some games and watch him play.
No, I think that's great. That's good stuff, Terrence. I'm glad to have you share that. So before you were joining us, talking about the fact that, like some of it's kind of put on and some of it's for show. But, last year, Georgia did have some critics, right? There were some people who didn't think Stetson Bennett could win a second straight national championship, that didn't think Georgia could thrive after losing 15 drafted players off the previous year's team. And Georgia went out there and obviously silenced those doubters last season. And, Terrence, I get the impression there may still be some of those for this upcoming season there as well. Do you think it's fair to say that even in the midst of all the winning that Georgia's done, they still haven't quite made believers out of everybody maybe just yet?
In football terms, it's fair because each team is different. We all know what type of recruiter the Georgia Bulldogs are right now, and they're bringing in the top talent. But each year brings a different element, a different team. And, one of the things that I spoke about last year when all those draft picks was lost, it's just the leadership. I think the leadership comes with more than talent. We have talented players. We lost a quarterback that have started a lot of games, breaking a new quarterback. So we could go out and there can be some, are they going to be able to do what they have done the last 2 years? But, I think the players and the coaches understand what's in front of them, and I think they're going to go out each and every week and prove people wrong. But just to have doubts, I don't think it's unfair to have doubts going into the season by the outsiders.
And as a player yourself, I think people our age love like Michael Jordan, Last Dance, things like that. And Jordan as a player was always seemingly looking for whatever motivational edge and advantage that he could give for himself, taking things personally, things like that. He always just kind of wanted that edge and that competitive fire. Like, how important is that? Like, do we make too much of this? The idea that you're going to use perceived doubt or somebody not believing in you or making an enemy out of your opponent as some sort of like competitive edge there. I mean, like how real is all of that?
Oh, it's definitely real. The competitive edge of not really giving bulletin board material is real because I think that's one of the things that players play on. Just like the last dance, like you said, and BA, this is going to come to a surprise to you. I have not watched one.
Oh, you got to watch it.
The Last Dance. I watched clips on social media, but have not watched it. But like they said, Michael Jordan would make up things about his opponents to get his motor going. So having critics out there is a good thing in my opinion because now the coaches have something to build on during the summer. You're not as great as you think you are. You're reading the press clippings and everyone is praising you. But when there's some doubt, there's some things that the coaches can use as extra motivation. And sometimes you need that motivation because I think a lot of people don't understand, those long days when there's no football in the summer and you just don't really get a full grasp of what the football team is going through, what they have to put their bodies through to prepare themselves for the season. Some days you just don't want to do it. You're just tired. And there's some extra motivation that the coaches can use to get you amped up and ready to prepare you for your day. So it is real, and I think I would love for the critics to continue to doubt this team so they can actually have more motivation to try to three-peat.
Let me shift gears, talk about a different topic here for a moment. There's been some chatter out there about the future of the Georgia-Florida game in Jacksonville. Terrence, I've been kind of operating on the assumption that this game was eventually going to leave and become a home and home. It just seems like that's the direction the wind's been blowing. But I guess there's some new reporting out there that maybe not quite as true. It sounds like that both these teams, Georgia and Florida, may be content to kind of take the 2 option years that exist on this contract after the end of this season. So we may be in for at least a couple of more years the game in Jacksonville because the contract does allow for those extended years. And then even through some stadium renovations, it sounds like based on some reporting that, hey, that they may still shop this around as a neutral site game for those 2 years and then quite possibly looking to keep it neutral even beyond that. Now, some of this may also just be posturing and trying to see how much money they can get. And obviously we know how negotiations go. But from the standpoint of what should happen, I'm sure we've talked about this in the past. Do you think this game should be in Jacksonville? Do you think it should be in a home-and-home situation? Would you be interested in seeing this played in a neutral site somewhere other than Jacksonville? What are your overall feelings on this?
So my feelings is something that I would like to see. It probably would never happen. But I would like a 4-site rotation. That means Georgia get a home, Florida get a home, we go to Jacksonville, then we get one in the Mercedes-Benz in a 4-year span. So that would be my idea if I had to say. I would love to see that because everybody get opportunity to experience a home and home, get to experience two neutral sites in both states. So that would be my choice, but, that game is just so beloved in Jacksonville. I'll be shocked if it leaves Jacksonville, but if I had to say, that would be my home and home and two neutral sites in each state.
That's kind of what Coach Rick used to say too, right? Obviously, the coach that you played for, at least for part of your career there at Georgia. Did y'all ever talk about that? Because it seems like Coach Rick at times would sort of say something similar to that. Is that something y'all ever discussed?
No, it never came up that I can remember about trying to move the venue. I just think that is just such a big spot, and everyone just knows the world largest cocktail party. So it was never that I can remember a topic of discussion. But just for me, I just would love to see that 4 rotations for home and home and two neutral sites.
I understand where you're coming from. I think a lot of Georgia fans probably agree with you on that. I guess the one thing I would say in response to that is, and I kind of joked about this with our audience before you joined us, it seems like Georgia already plays so many games in Atlanta. Oftentimes they begin the season there because of a Chick-fil-A kickoff. The SEC championship takes place in Atlanta every year. There's always they've played in the Peach Bowl a couple of times, national championship there. It seems like they end up playing in Atlanta 3-4 times a year as it is for whatever reason, that it's almost like they're getting their fair share of Mercedes-Benz Stadium right now. And that maybe because of that, Georgia, Florida, that's not the right place for that because it seems like Georgia's already in Atlanta a pretty good bit just because of how successful the program has been.
No, I agree. Just thinking of that aspect, I definitely agree with you on that. And I can and we just do a home and home and one in Jacksonville, then just do a 3-team rotation. But I definitely agree with you that we have been to the Mercedes, and that's just basic Sanford Stadium 2.0, I would say. But no, I agree with you on that we have played at the Mercedes-Benz a lot, and probably the lure of Georgia playing there has probably lost its luster a little bit because we are playing in it so much. So I agree with you on that.
So one final topic I want to address during our time together. ESPN had a write-up the other day looking at the Georgia quarterback situation. I'd sort of planned on talking about this on the show today, just didn't have time to. And one of the things they discussed, Terrence, is the idea that this is a competition that's still going to go into the season and that maybe Carson Beck's ahead right now, but Kirby's kind of shown you in the past that he'll make that switch during the year. Obviously did that with Stetson Bennett there in 2021. And I sort of felt like this was a little bit of a mischaracterization that when I look into the Georgia quarterback situation, I sort of see a guy like Carson Beck, the best that I can tell. Now, you've seen practice, you're closer to the program than I am, but I sort of got the sense that Beck really asserted himself this spring. And actually, the quarterback situation at Georgia probably seems a little clearer post-spring practice, and I sort of thought that it would be. I thought it might be a little closer, but the best that I can tell, it seems like Carson Beck right now, and he hasn't been named starter. Kirby's not going to do that, but boy, he certainly has demonstrated himself, I think, to be the starting quarterback. Am I describing that the right way? Do you think that Carson Beck is going to clearly put himself out in front as the potential Georgia starting quarterback at the conclusion of spring practice here?
I mean, just for the opportunities that I've had opportunity to watch, he's definitely the clear cut. But, we're not there every day, and we don't have the data that, the coaches have. But just from the spring game and opportunity I got to talk, Carson Beck is definitely the better quarterback right now for it being the most ready to play. So it just seems like it's just a formality that they're going through. But like you said, because you started game one does not mean you're going to finish the season. Kirby have showed that he will make a change at the quarterback position if he feels like the next quarterback gives us a better opportunity to win. So I think Kirby's all about trying to win. It's about trying to put the best 11 players on the field, and that's what he's going to do. But as of right now, today, if we play the game today, I would bet my last dime that Carson Beck runs out on the field first. And
I kind of finished with this. I mean, to me, it seems like while obviously sometimes you want that competition, you want to, kind of put these guys against each other, eventually competition sort of gives way to development. And eventually you kind of want to allow the confidence the player has in himself to grow, the confidence that the other players around him have in him to grow there as well, that the Georgia coaches demonstrate, hey, we trust this guy. We're going to build the offense around this guy and allow all these great pass catchers to kind of flourish, with him, that there's something to be said for this summer, not just being about trying to choose between the the quarterbacks that Georgia has, but to say we've sort of made our choice. We're not announcing this to the media, but we've sort of made our choice. It is Carson, and now we're going to allow all of you who are going to be blocking for him or catching passes from him or whatever else to kind of get comfortable with that. To me, it sort of seems like that's what the summer should be about. How true is that from your perspective?
Most definitely, because the quarterbacks kind of lead everything that's on the field. Coaches are really not allowed on the field with them, and so the quarterbacks that's leading the 7-on-7 is leading everything that has to do with field activity.
Did we lose Terrence? There he is.
Come up with their own. They have to come up with their own scripts. So the quarterbacks are the leaders to get the guys galvanized throughout the summer. So I just think, Carson and all the other quarterbacks just continue to work, continue to get better, continue to understand what Coach Bobo is trying to do. I know we're going to be very similar offensively, but Coach Bobo will have his own ideas as well. So it's just up to those quarterbacks to figure out the summer routine, and they should already have a blueprint of what they should be doing because we are back-to-back national champs.
I love it, Terrence. Fun conversation. We're always glad to have you as a part of it here in our program. Is Milton Spring Practice, is it done? How much more time do you guys have, and when will the bubble work begin again for the preparations for this summer and heading towards the fall?
So we have our walkthrough today. We play cash on Friday.
That's
so
a fun game.
Yeah. Yes, it will. I get to see Jacoby up and close. I've seen him a bit in 7-on-7. Never seen him in person in the game. So all Georgia fans come out, especially in the Alpharetta area. If you want to see a Georgia commit, Jacoby White coming against our Milton Eagles, we play them Friday at 7:30.
I love that.
The bubble work will start the week after that.
I love that. Tell folks how they can find you online again, Terrence.
You can find me on all social media, Terrence Edwards, Wide Receiver Academy.
Hey, good stuff, Terrence. Thanks for your time. We'll look forward to talking to you next week.
Thanks.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So this is something that Jake Fromm, who's going to join us in a few minutes, I talked about it the other day. With all the chatter of, hey, maybe in college football we should have spring games where, I guess Hugh Freeze kind of started this round of this discussion. Maybe we should be playing Troy. We should be playing UAB. And Troy and UAB were like, heck yeah, we'll sign up for that. We want to play you. That sounds good to them. But Jake was saying, this is something that happens in high school football all the time. And that's a good point. So, Terrence is a part of the coaching staff there in Milton, big-time 7A power, a lot of success, a lot of talented players that kind of come through there over the years. And they get a spring game coming up, lower classification team, but really, really talented. Sokovia White, they're the Cass Colonels. Seeing Sokovia against Milton in a spring game, that's good football, y'all. That's good football. And so I love the fact that our state does that kind of stuff. There's always that attempt to kind of, hey, how much good football can we fit into 1 year? Obviously, the Corky Kell Classic, which I'm fortunate to be a part of, grows each and every year. We're introducing some new things to our state championships this year. Going to be bringing in replay, probably long overdue. We'll actually kind of get a preview of that of sorts during Corky Kell. But, this is just a state that tries to make sure it's playing, at the cutting edge of high school football. And some of these really, really fun spring games against teams from oftentimes classifications you might not otherwise get a chance to see. I just think it's great. And it takes a certain level of courage on the part of coaches to say, okay, we'll match up, we'll go out there and play you, we'll do those kinds of things. But there's always a good number of Georgia coaches who do have that mindset of anytime, anywhere, any place, we'll play you, any team. And that's a fun one coming out, Milton and Cass on Friday night. A lot of great spring games around the state of Georgia. So we'll try to update you there on that as it kind of comes around. By the way, speaking of Jake Fromm, he'll join us here in a moment. Prior to that, though, let us go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And boy, I'm excited. I got a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation coming up, but I'm also excited for your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. So many of you are good enough to share with me when you're heading on the high seas, whether it be one of those 3-night, 4-night itineraries, the 7-night itineraries on the Oasis class ships. There's also kind of a really fun announcement as it relates to Oasis class ships in Port Canaveral. That's the port we typically go out of because it's the one that's closest to us. We'll be telling you more about that as it becomes kind of relevant for you. So kind of some fun new announcements coming via our friends at Royal Caribbean. So this is a great time to be planning your Royal Caribbean cruise vacations. Obviously throughout the rest of 2023, but not too soon to start thinking about 2024. As I said before, cool new stuff coming to Port Canaveral, but also the debut of Icon of the Seas. It will be the largest cruise ship in the world when it introduces itself coming up in January. And boy, what a fun thing that's going to be. So If you think that might be a great opportunity for you to take your next cruise or maybe even your first cruise, our good friend Jessica Slater can help you out with all that. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You're going to experience the fun on board a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation that I have certainly loved for quite some time. All right, let's get a couple of SEC stories before we talk Jake Fromm. Most of this is just for fun. So we're kind of in rubber chicken circuit version of the portion of the year. It's sort of the talking season portion of the year, and we don't see Kirby kind of bouncing around doing a lot of these sort of booster club type dinners. I think he does 2 or 3 in the entire year. Other coaches do them more frequently. Jimbo Fisher, Texas A&M, was in Fort Worth doing one of these with some of his fans there in Fort Worth. And during the Q&A session, the subject of TCU came up. And Jimbo was talking about TCU and talking about how that they were able to stay healthy and they had a good team. But then he kind of took a little bit of a jab at the end, and when he said, and they finally ran up against an SEC team, and things got different real quick, or something to the effect, whatever it was that he said, basically acknowledging the fact that Georgia beat TCU 65-7. So if I'm Jimbo Fisher, I'm not quite so sure I've done enough to be talking trash about anything here right now. Obviously, many of you are well aware of his shortcomings so far as Texas A&M coach. There's also something a little bit odd about Jimbo Fisher talking trash about something that Georgia did. Something about that sort of seems strange there as well. But listen, I'm not going to be mad about it. I like it when these coaches go on these, booster club type things, talking season type events and show a little bit of their personality. Jimbo's got a little orneriness to him. Jimbo's got a little edge to him. He comes from West Virginia. He's sort of got some of that fight in him. And he's not afraid to show it. So I'm not mad at him for doing it, but it is kind of funny to see Jimbo in this case talking trash about something that Georgia did, beating TCU 65-7. But he didn't mind reminding those folks in Fort Worth what had happened when TCU had run up against an SEC team there in the college football playoff. Another outspoken coach is Hugh Freeze. Freeze was at this. This is the week of the PGA Tour champions goes to the Birmingham area. It's actually one of the Champions Tour major events there in Birmingham, and they always have the Celebrity Pro-Am prior to that, the event sponsored by Regions Bank. There's always a bunch of SEC coaches there. It's actually an event that I've been to before. It's a pretty fun event. This is getting way off the subject, but I actually like the PGA Tour champions. I think it's a fun thing to go see in person if you ever get a chance to. Golfers are pretty personable, I should say. They are oftentimes willing to kind of interact with you a little bit. It's a little bit more of a laid-back vibe than sometimes you get on the actual PGA Tour. I think it's also a pretty fun brand of golf, too. So I'm a pretty big fan of what you sort of used to think of as the old senior tour. They call it something different now. I'm kind of a fan of it, and I actually like this event in Birmingham. If you ever get a chance to go, I think it's worth doing. I've been before. But there's always a bunch of coaches there for the Celebrity Pro-Am. That's always kind of a cool thing to see. Kirby Smart was there. We're going to play some audio from Smart's radio appearance from Birmingham. We'll do that probably tomorrow. And maybe a couple times next week there too. But Hugh Freeze was also there as well. And Freeze kind of said something about his quarterback situation that's kind of gotten some attention, but I think it's just sort of fair. I think that Freeze is speaking fairly here. So he's asked about bringing in the transfer quarterback from Michigan State and kind of what that means for a guy like Robbie Ashford. And Freeze said, hey, listen, we're going to do this each and every year. And he says, I think that Robbie's kind of handled this well, taking it well. But the fact of the matter is we want 4 scholarship quarterbacks on our roster at all times. And we're going to bring in guys to compete and let the best guy win. In other words, they're not just going to promise the quarterback job to Robbie Ashford. They want to make sure they have the right guy. And kind of reminds me of what I've told y'all before is that when you look at the kid from Michigan State, at his best, you would probably be led to believe he's going to be the Auburn starter because at his best, he probably rises to the level of being an SEC-level quarterback. But he wasn't always at his best, and oftentimes he wasn't his best against the very best competition that he faced while at Michigan State. A lot of experience, not all of it successful. So the point here is that I do expect the transfer quarterback to probably win the Auburn starting quarterback job, but I wouldn't completely count Robbie Ashford out on this either. This is a guy that's shown some athleticism, obviously popular with some Auburn fans because he went to Hoover High School there. And so I think that Free should probably be taken at face value on this, that you make the transfer quarterback, you bring him in for the purpose of competing. And based on the previous track record of the quarterbacks, he's likely to win that competition. But it's not obvious to me that it's going to be a walkover for him, and it's not obvious to me that Robbie Ashford won't be heard from at some point in time as well. But either way, y'all, this is important to keep in mind that Hugh Freeze, you can say what you want about his personal life, but his track record of working with quarterbacks has been pretty successful. Take a guy like Malik Willis. Willis was buried on the Auburn bench, left there, went to Liberty, and became a pretty valuable draft pick simply because of his time there in the Hugh Freeze offense while playing at Liberty. there's a chance that Freeze could do something similar to that here with the Auburn situation here now there as well. I think his presence in the SEC is going to be felt. We were talking about this with Mike Griffith yesterday. Mike and I both look at the idea of Auburn exceeding its 6.5 win total is probably the kind of thing that could happen. I could see them being 7-5 if everything kind of falls right. Could I even see them being 8-4? Yeah, I think I probably could. And the presence of Freeze could be a real problem for some of these other sort of youngish, newish coaches in the SEC who are trying to build up their own program. You know, Freeze has beaten Saban twice. Been to a couple of Sugar Bowls. Obviously, he had to, he left Ole Miss in disgrace. We understand that, but that doesn't mean he knows less about football than he ever did before. And he could be. Not even could be. He is the best fit for Auburn than any of the coaches they could have hired would have been. The other guy that was, kind of in conversation at one point in time to get the Auburn job was Lane Kiffin. Kiffin is speaking out again about his relationship with Nick Saban. And these two guys are seemingly joined at the hip. It's just amazing to me. And, Kiffin's talking about how much, reverence and respect he has for Nick Saban. He says something to the effect of basically, I'm allowed to sort of take jabs at him, but much like a family member type thing. I don't want anybody else taking jabs at him. And from time to time, you do see Saban defended by Kiffin on social media. You've kind of seen some of that kind of stuff. Kiffin's obviously, very profusive when calling the GOAT and things like that. And, my only point about Kiffin on this is, and I've said this before, at some point in time, if I'm an Ole Miss fan or whatever, school employs Kiffin somewhere in the future, it's like, don't you want to see Lane sort of step up and be his own man? It's like, being Nick Saban's caddy, at some point in time, don't you want to outgrow that role? Don't you want to be something other than, in that kind of relationship with Nick Saban? If Kiffin wants to kind of view himself as a man in full, as a true football coach, stepping out of the shadow of Nick Saban I think is probably important. But if anything, he kind of goes out of his way to kind of remind you how connected he still is to Nick Saban. Now, maybe all this is some sort of grand scheme and plan, and maybe one day he'll be the next Alabama coach. I don't know. Maybe, I guess anything's possible. Certainly, Saban seems to like Kiffin too, as much as Kiffin likes Saban. There's been a lot of back and forth between those two in the media, but it just sort of seems like at a certain point, it's time to sort of step up, be your own man, and get out of the Nick Saban shadow. That's clearly what Kirby Smart has done. Other guys, for the good or the bad, have kind of done that there as well. Jimbo Fisher hasn't been quite as successful as I think he thought he was going to be, but he has certainly removed himself from Nick Saban's shadow. Lane Kiffin right now still seems sort of content to remain in that shadow, much like a grown-up adult kid who doesn't want to leave from home. It sort of seems like that's kind of what Lane Kiffin comes across sometimes to me. Either way, we'll make that cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean and get ready to talk to the former Georgia quarterback right now. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, time now for our Kroger Fresh Take and a chance to talk to the terrific former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm. Jake, so good to have you back on the program. Hope you are doing well, and we certainly appreciate your time.
Hey, Brandon. Doing good, man. Thank you for having me, and excited for it.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here there as well. Number of topics I want to get into. I want to start with something on the quarterbacks. The other day, ESPN had a thing about the Georgia quarterbacks, and I guess the angle they took was a little bit surprising to me because when I look back on the spring practice that was, even though Kirby Smart obviously is going to talk about the competition still being ongoing, to me it sort of looked like Carson Beck took some pretty big strides towards becoming the Georgia starter. That's not necessarily the way that ESPN recently kind of characterized that. How about from your perspective? And I understand, competition is important to Kirby, and he's going to want to make sure that is kind of maintained. But how much of a stranglehold do you think Carson put on the starting job during spring practice?
Yeah, I think he obviously wanted to solidify it. I think it's, this whole, competition word, I think it's a lot to do just really with the transfer portal, trying to keep it competitive. And I think it says a lot to your team, too, from a head coach perspective. When you say the quarterback, competition is up for grabs, those guys are competing. I think it also makes every other position that you have, more competitive, guys fighting to, wanting to win the starting job. So I just think you have a lot more competition, than throughout the entire team. Position to position.
One of the things the ESPN story also talked about was the fact that Kirby Smart has shown you, 2021 being an obvious example of this, that he'll make a quarterback change during the season if he needs to. I think back when you first emerged as a starter in 2017, you obviously didn't start the first game. Jacob Eason did. He got hurt. You took over after that. Then late in the season, I guess, we're led to believe that Jacob was healthy. He could have come back and played again. How much did you find yourself that year looking over your shoulder? Were you giving some assurances that you're going to be the guy? Like, how difficult is that for a quarterback when you're trying to obviously, lead the team, play well, but there's also that thought of sometimes maybe looking over your shoulder? Did you have much of that when you were, kind of first getting your Georgia career started?
Yeah, so I never really felt that way. I had kind of confidence. As a quarterback, man, when you're playing with confidence, you're playing with a little swagger, and you feel, the guys around you, start to believe in you. That really makes you feel good as a signal caller and go out and get stuff done. So I never really had that feeling, so to speak. But Coach Smart, when he has this quarterback competition, continue to go into the training camp. Well, what you do is you allow yourself later in the season, if you do need to make a change, a little bit easier, because those guys have had those reps. Other players on the team have seen this guy throw the football. It's easier to kind of buy into a new guy, and kind of makes that transition a little bit easier. So that'd be one benefit from it. But the opportunity cost that you lose out on is having a guy like Carson be able to go out and get plenty of reps, and feel comfortable with his receivers and all those good things.
You've been busy, obviously, this week with your own football career, so I don't know if you've seen this, but one of the hot topics around here has been the fact that Georgia's not going to the White House this year. Now, I'm sure you're just like me. You don't want to talk about politics here, but this has been obviously a little bit of an issue. So let me ask you this from the standpoint of kind of a former player here. Like, what kind of logistics challenge would this be when a season's over with and everybody's kind of going their own way, drafted, they're heading off their NFL teams, kind of getting everybody back together for something like this? Because I think that's kind of been, I guess, one of the concerns on the Georgia side is, how do you bring a team back together when they've been away now for so many months? From that standpoint, what's it like being a player maybe in a situation like this?
Yeah, it just kind of depends on, when is it, right? Are we back? Are we doing football? Is this during, May when we have off time? So it really just kind of comes down to when the set date was or we're going to be, so to speak. So, hey, look, that's a decision that the upper-level guys have to make. Josh Brooks and Kirby have to make. Let them make that decision, and we'll move on and play some football.
One of the other things that has kind of come up this week a little bit too is, and this is the kind of thing that I think a lot of us are going to have to make peace with moving forward. Especially somebody like me, Jake. I'm probably a little bit more of a traditionalist, but you've had to kind of get used to things being a little bit different, and even more different moving forward in college football. One of those things, a guy like Dominic Blaylock, who's, beloved Georgia player and one of those guys that I think a lot of us believe could have had a great Georgia career if not for a couple of, pretty serious injuries that he dealt with. Well, Blaylock moving on. We've known he was in the transfer portal for quite some time. We found out this week that he's also, on his way to Georgia Tech. And for a lot of Georgia fans, and, Jake, you're a guy that grew up in Georgia, so I think you probably have an understanding of this. There's that weird conflict here of, well, Blaylock's a guy that I really like, but he's playing for a team like Georgia Tech that Georgia fans don't like very much, and yet you sort of feel like now you kind of got to make peace with that a little bit. As a guy who played kind of what I think of as sort of the pre-transfer portal era in some respects, what do you think about the idea that in the future more guys that played for Georgia may play against Georgia, and it may become slightly more commonplace for players to even go from the UGA roster to the Tech roster as they kind of take advantage of this transfer portal situation? You're a lot younger than I am. Is this weird for you, or is this just the way the sport is now?
Yeah, so from a player perspective, being in the NFL and then being on a couple different teams, that's just kind of part of the business. It is now kind of new for college football, so to speak. But I think it really comes down to, hey, what kind of teammate were you? And then how did it all go down when you left? Well, Dom was a great teammate when I was there, and I think Dom, left on very good terms. So, as far as guys, going and obviously playing Georgia Tech here and going to play Dom later in the year, it'll be a fun game. Yeah, I think a lot of guys will look forward to it. It'll be fun for them. They're going to wish him all the success in the world, except for that one game during that week, during Thanksgiving week. So, but it is a cool, neat thing that is changing with college football because guys are moving around more. So, just something we have to get adjusted to. It's
our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here on DawgNation Daily here. We're always happy to have Jake as part of our program, and this week in particular important when it comes to our friends at Kroger because we're looking ahead to Sunday being Mother's Day. And don't forget, when you're getting stocked up on the flowers you need to give to your mom, or the greeting card, or the maybe ingredients for that special meal you want to cook, our friends at Kroger got you covered on all of that. Just find out more online, Kroger.com/Mother's Day. That's Kroger.com/Mother's Day. You can also stop by and shop in store there as well to get ready for the big day coming up on Sunday. Jake, we'll finish up with this. Kirby Smart this week was asked about what we expect to be an announcement in the next few weeks about a change to the SEC schedule where there's a chance the league's going to go to a 9-game conference schedule. Even if it stays at an 8-game conference schedule, we know divisions are going away, and we know that league teams are going to start playing each other more frequently. So the basic theory here is if you stay at Georgia for all 4 years, you'd have a chance to visit every stadium in the SEC while your college career was taking place. You know, you kind of played back in the era when divisions were very much a thing, and there were a lot of stadiums that you never visited. As a player, would you have liked that more, to kind of see more of the SEC, to kind of rotate the schedule a little bit more? Maybe you liked divisional play because those were traditional rivals. As a player yourself, what kind of thought would you have on what the schedule could have looked like? And, you know, you never played at Ole Miss. You never played at Texas A&M. I could go through a list of places that you kind of never played just because that's where, you know, that what the schedule, you know, kind of dictated. Do you wish you did see more of the SEC while you were at UGA?
Oh, Brandon, see, this is tough. As a former player, I'm really torn with this because on one hand, I think it really would have been neat. I think it would have been awesome to be able to go around and play at all these different places. And then on the other hand, man, I really love the tradition of the SEC. Like, you know what it's going to be. You're going to get those, you know, 2 to 3 different games, you know, where you could be somewhere else. But, man, I love, hey, knowing I am going to play Florida and Jacksonville. You know, I know I'm going to play Vandy, Kentucky, South Carolina. Like, I know I'm going to play these teams, right? It's just a cool tradition, in my opinion. So it is tough for me to really say, well, you know, what would I rather have? I don't know. I know it's going to be a big change, and I know it's going to be a big deal as far as schedule-wise and who you're playing and where you're playing. It could really make or break a team's season throughout the year with the schedule they get. So I think it's going to be a big deal and something to watch out for.
And as a quick follow-up to that, I would sort of count some of the Florida games as some of the best games you ever played. Certainly 2018, I'd say 2019 was in that discussion there for you there as well. There is a lot of talk that sometime in the very near future, that game might not take place in Jacksonville anymore. You know, do you have any thoughts on, you know, the game remaining there, the pageantry, the tradition, but also the chance to, I guess, benefit from also getting a chance to play them in your own state there as well? You're a good person to ask this because you had so many big performances in the cocktail party. What would you think if it went away?
Well, I appreciate that, Brandon. I always like to circle that one at the beginning of the year. But, yeah, I see that's another tough one, too, because I love going into a different atmosphere. I love walking out on the field and just knowing, hey, like, it's going to be red on one side, it's going to be blue on the other, 50-50. It just kind of feels like a different kind of mini bowl game in the middle of the season. You know, it's like a weird SEC championship, you know, like a 50-50 deal. So I always look forward to it. I loved it, even though it really kind of felt like more of a home game for those guys because we were in Florida. But I know for the fans, I mean, that's an awesome experience for them, for the kids at school, you know, who go down there, go to St. Simon's and do all that stuff. So, I mean, I think it's cool. I love the tradition of it.
You go straight
but
to music,
from the
okay?
football side of it, from the coach's perspective, you do lose a game for being able to recruit, have guys in, show them the cool way we do stuff at Sanford Stadium. So, you know, you're going to give and take a little bit. So, you know, what's it going to be? Something to look out for.
Jake, good stuff. Always happy to have you as a part of the program. We appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to talking to you very soon as a part of our Kroger Fresh Take.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Brandon. Appreciate you.
Yeah, so as I told Jake, I mean, if you want to make a list of, like, true, like, Gator killers, I mean, Jake Fromm is pretty high on that list. I don't know that he ever played a better game than he did against Florida in 2018. And he really played a very good game against the Gators in 2019 there as well. It turned out to be his last. But that 2018 performance is good a Georgia quarterback performance almost as we've seen. So around here, we believe that a good Georgia fan is a Gator hater, whether the game's played in Jacksonville or anywhere else. I hope it's not played in Tampa. But wherever the game is played, we believe a good Georgia fan is a Gator hater first and foremost. And if you love hating the Gators, you love what Jake Fromm did to the Gators, 3-0 in his career as the Georgia quarterback. And certainly we love those rivalry game performances. By the way, now, speaking of all kinds of cool stuff related to Georgia. How about a golden shoe? Hayes Calloway sharing this. I love Hayes' setup here, all those framed, field editions from our friends at the AJC and Dog Nation and all that kind of stuff. But I also love the fact that Georgia has now won enough big games that you can have that kind of like framed, really two walls in a house framed with, headlines and stories from big wins that Georgia has gotten. That sort of tells you a pretty good story about Georgia right there. Not only a great collection on Hayes' part, but also a great collection of big wins that Georgia's provided, which makes all of us feel really good. So, Hayes, well-deserved golden shoe for you on that. And lousy, stinking Gators. We do know the game's in Jacksonville this year, and we do know what the result's going to be. At least we believe we do. Georgia beating up on Florida again 170 days from right now. Nice even number for you today. 170 days from right now. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We will see all of you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. All right, let's get some comments, and let's see how folks are doing. I'm going to start on YouTube. We'll see what they're arguing about, and we'll kind of just sort of take it from there and see how it's going. On the YouTube side of things, Nature Gator says, I see doggies on the river all the time. I sit gators on them. Listen, here's the thing you understand, Nature, is that I know that people have a misbegotten notion about the Bulldog because they saw Bevo back in 2018 completely sneak attack, sucker punched Uga basically. Uga got pinned into the corner, and Bevo attacked him. Bevo clearly had not been in a major bowl game in decades and acted the part, completely total amateur hour performance by Bevo in this game. You want to go back to the Sugar Bowl. So it makes you think that Uga is not capable in sort of a combat situation like that. But look, Bulldogs know how to go for the throat. So if this had been a fair fight, had Uga seen Bevo coming, I mean, that's why they call them Bulldogs, right? They knows how to go for the bull. I mean, I'm not saying I want Uga to do something so lethal to another mascot, but if need be, Uga's ready for that. So you might say, well, I'm going to sick the Gator on the Bulldog. But the truth is, listen, assuming it's a fair fight and assuming the alligator doesn't try to sneak attack and sucker punch Uga the way that Bevo did a couple of years ago, I would trust Uga in a situation like that. Now, Thomas Tyson says Boom has some fighting. His name is Boom, for goodness sakes. You think Boom doesn't know how to fight? Of course he does. G. Grace Bama Boy says alligators swimming in beach water in South Florida. We're in the end times, folk. I mean, if you go to Myrtle Beach and places like that, they have alligators in the water there. All those low country places, they don't like to brag about this. They don't like to, they don't put this on like the Chamber of Commerce stuff. But when I was a kid going to Myrtle Beach, they'd have alligators in the water. You have to get out of the water. Here comes an alligator. Now, I may talk a big game. I don't like the lousy, stinking gators. I have zero respect for them. But when it comes to a real alligator, I am very afraid of them. So I don't mind telling you this. I am very afraid of real alligators, and I'll tell you why. I think alligators give people a false sense of security. Alligators are sort of like docile until they're not. Because you always see these I somehow, I don't know how this happens, but I always end up seeing a lot of there's a lot of these channels that kind of sort of promote here's what these crazy country folks did. I always end up seeing a lot of those videos. And so you'll have these guys out fishing in swamp water or something like that. And they'll see an alligator and they'll take a beer and they'll listen, I don't condone this because I guess, you got animal rights and whatnot, but, they'll take the beer and they'll hit it off the alligator's tooth as a way of shotgun. I don't condone any of this. I'm just telling you a story of a thing that has happened. And they always think that's really funny. We're going to open the beer on the alligator's tooth. And the alligator just sort of sits there sometimes. And so I think a lot of people sort of feel like that alligators are sort of part of the furniture, part of the scenery, because they don't. Oftentimes alligators are content not to move. But when they do move, it is on. They'll whack you with the tail. They'll do that spinning thing in the water. I think that alligators, I don't know if it's part of their, whatever, but they're just kind of quiet and docile. They sort of act like they have no interest in moving. But when they do move, They move. Now, I am not wise enough to know if like the zigzag running thing actually works. Maybe if the alligator comes after Uga, maybe he just do the zigzag running thing, and the alligator will just be completely befuddled by that. But I actually am afraid of alligators. Taylor Russell says natural selection. No way I'm messing with a live gator. Yeah, because you see this a lot of times. Another one of those like viral video things I feel like I see all the time is a lot of gators on golf courses, right? And it's always kind of a big joke of, here's the alligator. And, how close will the golfer get to an alligator? And sometimes they're content to go pretty close. And like when I was a kid, I'd go to Okefenokee Swamp sometimes. And once again, you can get fairly close to alligators because sometimes they're not moving. But if they decide to move, it is on. It is on in a big way. Scott Harris is the new Uga named after our co-defensive coordinator. I don't think they've said what the name is related to. I don't think so. But obviously, Muschamp's nickname is Boom. You're right. Nature Gator. So I have a theory about this. He says there are a lot of gators in the rainbow. I'm not sure what that is, but he says never a human attack in the history of the river. Too clear. So Nature, here's my theory on something. There's a place that we go in Florida a lot. And because I said before, while I don't like the lousy, stinking gators, there are lots of portions of Florida that I really do enjoy. There's a place we go in Florida a lot. And it has all of these like little creeks and ponds and things like that. And, I mean, you know what this stuff looks like in Florida, right? I mean, it just looks like there's 1,000 gators inside this water. But the people, at this particular place are like, no, we don't have any gators. We don't ever see any gators. Or in Nature Gators' case, there's never been a gator hurt anybody. I feel like that's all propaganda. I do. I feel like there's a lot of propaganda on the part of Floridians to make it seem like gators aren't even real. That, no, we haven't seen a gator here ever. There's no way that's true. They got gators in Disney World. If you walk around Disney World, they got signs up everywhere. Watch out for gators. So if they got gators in Disney World, they got gators everywhere. And that's just a fact. So I definitely am a big believer in like sort of a Floridian conspiracy theory that somehow there are no gators. If there are, because I've known people live in Florida, they got them in their swimming pools. They get them everywhere. Like these are wild animals. I mean, we got raccoons around here. They got gators down there. I mean, it's just, if you live in a place, you got indigenous wild animals. That's an indigenous wild animal. Everybody was like, I had never seen a gator. I sort of feel like that's a little bit put on. That's sort of like Zack Smith. All right, let's see what else. Crow King 123 says, thankfully, snapping turtles won't go after you. Now, when I was a kid, I saw a snapping turtle snap, and oh boy, it's another one of those things. They don't really do anything until they do. My little cousin one time got too close to one. Pow! Now, it didn't bite him, but it tried to. Colby Strawder. Yeah, I like the idea of a roundtable show. We used to do stuff like that from time to time. I wouldn't mind doing that. Yeah, I think. So Johnny Surf Dog brings up a good point. He says us doing like a post-game show from the swamp on that field after a Georgia win, that would feel pretty good. I have to say that would feel pretty good. Frank Patterson says a water moccasin is going to go after you in a hurry. That's another thing. I don't like snakes. I'm like Andre the Giant. No snakes, Bobby. I don't like snakes. And, summertime, you sort of think about growing up, you just sort of go find like a creek or a little river to play in. Like my kids love that kind of stuff. I'll go play in the creek somewhere. Man, there's water moccasins and stuff like that everywhere around there. For sure. Thomas Tyson says Kirby might hang 100 in the swamp. I mean, it would be a big deal to play in Gainesville. It would be a big deal. And hosting Florida would be a big deal. I think it's weird to think. What I can't tell about the Andy Staples thing in the Athletic, and I'm sure his sources told him all this directly, but I can't tell if his sources told him that because they're just trying to hold out for the highest bidder and they'll just, eventually go home and home, or if that's one of those things that there really is a chance they don't play home and home. Because, as I said before, that was a little bit different than I expected to hear. Taylor Russell says, speaking of snakes, what's Urban Meyer up to these days? That's very funny. Paul Moon says, to get revenge for Spurrier, Kirby might figure out the most points scored against them and make that his goal. I would hope that's the case. Largest margin of victory in Georgia-Florida history, 75-0. That was, I believe, the Georgia team in 1942. So I think it's important to have goals in life. That seems like a pretty good one to me. Johnny Surf Dog says never swim in brackish water. I think that's probably a pretty good tip. Because you can even get sharks in like brackish water, right? I mean, sharks can swim in that, right? See, I sort of feel like that maybe I can't figure out sharks. I sort of feel like there's a chance that sharks are actually less dangerous than we kind of treat them as they are. Because there are plenty of time. I mean, now there's also some propaganda out there about sharks too. I find it very interesting to note that like a lot of shark attacks don't seem to make their way into the news reports, which I think is kind of interesting. But nonetheless, I didn't realize I was quite so conspiratorial about animal attacks, but I guess I'm somewhat conspiratorial about animal attacks. Ducati Tech says Spurrier destroyed us in Athens the last home game. Yeah, I mean, I hate that. I mean, I do. I mean, listen, part of the story of those of us who are enjoying the Georgia success that right now is based on some of the stuff from the past that was obviously not enjoyable. And, you know, Steve Spurrier, in some respects, kind of ruined the Atlanta Braves' first World Series, because the World Series was won by the Braves that night. But that day, you know, I did not like seeing Florida, you know, score so many points against Georgia and Athens. I hated that. Now, eventually, I kind of got over it. Happy about the Braves winning the World Series, but it was definitely a sort of a dark cloud over an otherwise great day. Christy says, who was Shark Humper? I think what she's referencing is the one that kind of looked like Jim McElwain a couple of years ago, which in all honesty, I actually felt sorry for Jim McElwain. Like Jim McElwain, I don't think handled that very well, but the picture of the guy on top of the shark was not McElwain. Now, it looked just like him. It really did. I mean, we all have to admit that. That looked just like him, but it wasn't him. And so McElwain had no sense of humor about that at all. And from his standpoint, it's like, I'm getting, you know, maligned and criticized here for something I didn't even do. I think they did figure out who it was. And I'm not going to say, because I'm not 100% sure I remember, but I think they figured out who it was. I think they figured out. Let me just leave it at that. I do believe they figured out who it was. But it wasn't McElwain. It was. It looked just like him, but it wasn't him. And, you know, Jim, I think, could have handled it better, you know, because he was so, you know, serious about it. He did not have any sense of humor about it whatsoever. No sense of humor about it whatsoever. Which I guess in some respects I understand. Like if some video came out of me or picture came out of me and it looked just like me and people were like sharing this around all the time, I felt like my reputation was being harmed by it. I guess I'd probably not like that either. But if you're a public figure, you sort of have to figure out a way to kind of like massage it, kind of finesse it. I don't think that McElwain did that very well, but the picture was not him. It was some other guy. Jay Shipe's giving to Neil a hard time. Jay, that's not appropriate. Johnny Surf Dog says sharks swim past humans without a care 99.9% of the time. Bites are usually mistaken identity. Yeah, I guess that's probably true. Taylor Russell says, I understand his reaction completely in today's cancel culture. Yeah. You know, I mean, it would really stink to get canceled for something you didn't even do. That would really stink. Jonathan Aaron says, what's the most confusing mascot or chant a college team to you? Potentially, I guess, a lot of answers to that. Like, I don't understand. Do y'all know, like, the rock chalk Jayhawk thing in Kansas? I don't get that at all. That's weird to me. But also, I think it's weird how many mascots are horrifying. Like the Pistol Pete mascot from Oklahoma State, that's one of the scariest looking faces you will ever see. The Iowa Hawkeye mascot, scary. Like there are a lot of mascots. If you really just look at the face, if you saw that thing looking through your bedroom window at 4 a.m., I mean, you'd have coronary. I mean, like there are some horrifying mascots. I would say Pistol Pete from Oklahoma State may be the scariest. But there are a few of them that are really, really scary. All right, I got to go to the other comment sections. Scott Harris says the Stanford mascot's weird. Yes, there's a lot of weird stuff around Stanford, too. Colby asked about the Georgia-Florida game. So the thing from the top of the show was, and I should say, hey, why don't you go back and watch it again? But I'm going to give it to you for free. So the stadium's going to be renovated coming up in a couple of years, and there's a guy named Andy Staples from The Athletic who's reporting that they may not go home and home during those 2 years, which could leave the door open for this game actually remaining in Jacksonville long term because, no surprise here, I guess, the two schools, Georgia and Florida, really like getting all this money. And I guess the overall, financial compensation for the Georgia-Florida game is actually maybe a little bit more lucrative than I realized it was. So may still be a little bit of life left in the cocktail party, even though that's not quite what Kirby Smart wants. All right, let me go to the other comment sections. Let me do DawgNation.com if I can find it in my browser. There we go. Cam Acey says, if you want to see some intense encounters with gators, head on over to TikTok and take a look at Fishing Garrett. Okay, I will. Now, I'm not on TikTok, but I'll see if I can find that for sure. Rambo says, one day Bevo will make some good brisket. So there's a place over in Hall County the other day I was driving by. That's where my family's from. And they had those big, longhorn steers, out. I've never seen those, just out in the wild. Not in the wild, it's a pasture. But do you eat those? Can you eat those? What's the purpose of the longhorn steers? Let's see what else. It's thank you, Third and Wheel. TIAA Bank. There you go. Cam Ace says, I'm not on TikTok either, but I downloaded to watch this dude. Just an absolute freak show. Walks around the Everglades barefoot. That's amazing. That's crazy. There's also one that my kids like. Who is that? That there's something like one of those kid-oriented YouTubers that does a bunch of crazy stuff like that. I'll have to check that out. Thank you, Cam, for that. I appreciate that. That is crazy. I mean, I'm not quite so sure how much social media fame would be enough for me to justify walking around barefoot like that. Just not quite so sure, but that's wild. That's wild. That is really, really wild. All right, let me go to Facebook for a moment. I guess it's literally wild. All right, on Facebook. Yeah, Alan Verbonchik kind of going back and remembering those Steve Spurrier years. Yeah, you got to get some revenge for that. Bill Sanders says, I'm the conspiracy theorist. He laughs about that. So I'm a big believer in small-scale conspiracies, covering up gators and sharks and things like that. I'm kind of a believer in sort of small-scale conspiracy stuff. Denise White Loper says all the low country areas have gators in the golf courses. Yeah, I mean, that's just the thing. It's you go to one of those South Carolina coastal low country areas. I mean, there's just gators everywhere. Gators everywhere, which is why I laugh about the fact that in Florida, they're we don't have any gators here. I've never seen one. Jacob O'Neill giving me criticism for staying on YouTube too long. That's probably fair today. Probably fair to me. Alan Verbonchik says, I do fear crocodiles. So I know a crocodile's got the narrow snout, but are there crocodiles in America? I thought everything in America was alligators. I've never actually, other than a zoo, I don't believe I've ever seen a crocodile. Alan Verbonchik also talking about Brutus the Buckeye being kind of stupid looking. Yeah, I mean, what is a Buckeye? It's a flower. I'm really glad Georgia's mascot's not a flower. That doesn't seem very intimidating. So I'm very glad that Georgia's mascot's not a flower. So Jacob O'Neill and Pete Williams talking about this. He says, I go to a pond in a kayak with gators, they'll run from you. See, I feel like that's one of the things they do is, sometimes they want no part of people, but if they decide otherwise, that's a tough situation. Tough situation. Let's see what else. So Bill Sanders says that the Longhorn steers, that's where the best steaks come from. Is that true? I didn't know. I didn't know if they were just for show. I didn't know that. Listen, I don't really know. I like my steak, but I don't really know where it comes from. I'm just glad it gets to me eventually. Matt Rukavina says, while Jake was 3-0 versus Florida, I also love his good old Rocky Top moment after the Tennessee game in 2019. Matt, very good point. Very good point. Bo Bridge is also pointing out that you can eat the Longhorn steer. So there you go. And Matt says it's not only can you eat it. Now Matt lives in Texas, so he's definitely a trusted source. And this is not only can you eat it, but it's generally better than the standard Black Angus. There you go. There you go. That's good to know. Matt Rukavina misses my Dan Mullen impersonations. Maybe we'll have reason to do that some point in time again. Pete Williams says if you're from the South, you learn to eat anything. There's a lot of that for sure. William Camacho says, I believe the neutral site game between Georgia and those lousy, stinking Gators should be played in Atlanta. I think a lot of people do. You heard Terrence making his case of that a little bit earlier. I guess my thing on that is, as I said during the show, they just play so many games in Atlanta already. I just don't know that one more game in Atlanta makes it that much better. But, William, I think a lot of people do agree with you on that. Alan Verbanchik says a Buckeye is a nut. I thought a Buckeye was a flower. Is it a nut? I guess that would make sense. Either way, that seems, in some respects, even worse. Okay, yeah, so two things they have embarrassed myself on. I didn't know you could eat Longhorn steers, and I thought a Buckeye was a flower. There is a Buckeye flower, though, isn't there? Maybe it's named after the nut. But I still sort of stand by it. I don't know that having a nut for a nickname is even better. I mean, Georgia has a lot of peanuts. You know, I'm glad that Georgia's not the peanuts. You know, hard to conjure up quite as much emotion to go cheer for the peanuts as to go root on the dogs. Alan Rabanchik says a dog in a boat will draw gators for sure, and the dog does not even have to bark. I've seen it several times. They warn you in the Okefenokee Swamp not to leave your to not leave your dogs tied up on a leash. They will get eaten, and they have been eaten. That's rough. And see, that's interesting. They don't even have to bark. The gators just sort of sense them. Boy, that's crazy. Can you imagine you're sitting there fishing or something like that, got your trusty pet beside you, and gator just that'd be awful. Zack Adams says, let us get an extra hour on the show today. I know you've got the material. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm running out of gas today. So Denise White, see, I'm learning all kinds of stuff. So Denise White Loper says, not only is a Buckeye a nut, it's a nut you can't even eat because they're poisonous. My goodness. I didn't know that at all. Donovan Jackson also kind of making the case for rotating years between Atlanta and Jacksonville. It's amazing how many people want to do that. A lot of people seem to. That's never been all that appealing to me, but a lot of people really like that. So Buckeyes are poisonous nuts. I did not know that. Cherie Byra says that we live in the low country in South Carolina in a neighborhood with lagoons throughout. I can only imagine. One being behind our home. We see alligators all the time. As long as you stay a good distance away so they don't feel threatened, you'll be fine. And don't ever let your pet go in that direction. Yeah, I can only imagine that for sure. Matt Rukavina says, I learn the most when I come to Facebook. Yeah, it seems that way today. Lucy also saying the DawgNation Daily is educational. That'd be the case too. Scotty Barnes talking about putting gator on a grill. Now, one year at Marlowe's prior to the Georgia-Florida game, they did make some gator tail, like little gator tail bites. It was good. It was really good. I enjoyed that. That was really good. Stanley Keaton says Buckeyes an Ohio State tree. Can't understand why. Yeah. That's funny. All right, final trip to the comment section. We got to go. Let me go back over to YouTube. I'll go everywhere one more time. Let's see what else. Oh, I'm sorry to hear this. Nature Gator, who we like going back and forth with, but obviously, we're glad to have him as part of our community, says, developed a muscle disease that has serious weakened me, and I can't play golf anymore. It's been life-changing. Nature, I'm really sorry about that, and I mean that sincerely, genuinely. I'm very, very sorry. Very, very sorry about that. I'm not a very good golfer, but I do enjoy playing, and I can only imagine what it must feel like frustration-wise to not be able to enjoy something you really enjoy doing. So I am very sorry, and I hope you keep us updated about your health, sir. I appreciate that. I appreciate you telling us about that, and I'm very, very sorry. Frank Patterson reminding us that if we play the Gators in Miami, we could go on a cruise the next day. Man, maybe you're starting to sell me on it now. And by the way, I guess by the time that game takes place, you'll have, Icon of the Seas, things like that down there too. So maybe that wouldn't be quite so bad. I mean, I do think a DawgNation invasion cruise, Gator hater type cruise. I think there could be something there for that. I do. I think there could be something there for that. Yeah, Frank Patterson also on the subject of weird things other fan bases have, like the whole "Hang On Sloopy" thing. Ohio State fans love to sing that song. That seems a little bit weird to me too. G. Grace Bamboy says, "Where's Mike Johnson? Can we get him on the show this summer?" I'd like to. We had him on the show a couple of months ago. Mike's doing radio in Atlanta now, so he's kind of, for a while he was coaching and doing that, but he's kind of like back in the media world again. So, G, I'd love to get Mike back on the show this summer. We'll see if we can do that. But yeah, he's doing a great job. Morning radio here in Atlanta now. 92.9 The Game. Barry Watkins also mentioned putting up a for sale sign if he saw a bunch of gators in his backyard. I sort of get that. Bill Sanders says he sees alligators all the time down in Naples. They're all over the golf courses. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the places, all those ponds and things like that exist on golf courses, fertile soil for gators. Joseph Kennedy also shouting out the Jamaican jerk chicken. I do enjoy that. Randy Hall also pointing out that a Buckeye is a special candy. It's like one of those movie candies, right? It feels like people eat like Junior Mints and Buckeyes, things like that at movie theaters. I feel like that's the case. Tin Cup 67 says a Buckeye is a worthless nut with no commercial value. Been a lot of former Ohio State quarterbacks who have kind of maybe fit that description there as well. Randy Hall says, what a nightmare. College mascots looking through your bedroom window at 4 a.m. He said, how about Josh Heupel? Yeah, Heupel, that might be one of those faces there as well you wouldn't be pleased to see. Matt Rugavina says, subject of scary, near some Kodiak bears up in Alaska. Yeah, those big bears like that, that's crazy. Big bears like that. For sure. Yeah, those big bears are crazy. All right, we got to get ready to go. Thanks for being here, y'all. Y'all check out our friends at the AJC online, ajc.com. You can follow Braves finishing up a 2-game series with the Red Sox. Obviously, the Falcons' schedule releases tonight. Stay close to D-Led and those guys. I'm sure there'll be plenty of leaks that come out between now and then. That's always kind of a fun thing. But tonight around 8 p.m., ajc.com, I'll have the full Falcons schedule there for you. Also, I saw this, speaking of like not swimming, do you see where like Margaritaville, which I guess runs Lake Lanier Islands now, they're not going to let you swim in the lake this year? I'm not quite so sure what that's about. But there's some stuff there on that. If you want more on the Devin Willick lawsuit, the Willick family lawsuit, you can get some more of that there to ajc.com. And then kind of a cool feature on Spencer Strider, the terrific Braves pitcher there as well. All that online, ajc.com there for that. Also, our friends at R.S. Andrews. Find them online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that, including air conditioning. It's hot now. It's 80-something degrees last night in the evening time. So it's really kind of here. Summer's basically here. So get that AC unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Find them online at rsandrews.com for a lot more on that. They'll keep you cool and comfortable all summer long. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then.